Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to kick off today's presentation with the intriguing title, The Snake and the Mirror. This is our starting point, and I'll be guiding you through some fascinating ideas and stories related to this theme. Over the next few slides, we'll explore the lessons and insights that come from this thought-provoking topic. So let's get started and see where this journey takes us. Let's take a look at the contents of this presentation. We start with Vaikom Mohammed Bashir, a central figure whose life and work we'll explore. Then, we move on to awards, which highlight his recognition and achievements. Following that, we have an introduction that sets the stage for our discussion. The chapter begins here, marking the start of a deeper dive into his story. We also see sections dedicated to meanings, which will help us understand the significance behind key concepts and themes. As we progress, we'll encounter multiple points labeled meanings, each offering insights into the ideas and messages conveyed. Finally, there's a focus on the core meaning, tying everything together. Throughout this presentation, we'll see how these elements connect to the broader theme of understanding Bashir's impact and legacy. Vaikom Mohammed Bashir was born in January 1908 and passed away on July 5, 1994. He was also popularly known as Bapur Sultan. Not only was he an important figure in the Indian independence movement, but he was also a renowned writer in Malayalam literature. He wore many hats. He was a writer, a humanist, a freedom fighter, a novelist, and a short story writer. What made him stand out was his unique, down-to-earth style of storytelling. This approach made his work accessible and beloved both by literary critics and everyday readers alike. Some of his most notable works include Balyakalasaki, Shabdangal, Pathamayud Adu, Mathilukal, Janmadinam, and Anarga Nimisham. These stories and novels have been translated into many languages, earning him international recognition. Overall, Bashir's life and work exemplify a deep connection to humanist values and the spirit of freedom, which ties into our broader theme of exploring influential figures who shaped modern Indian literature and society. Let's talk about some of the awards he received, which truly highlight his remarkable contributions. In 1982, the government of India honored him with the Padma Shri, which is the fourth highest civilian award in the country. This recognition reflects the national importance of his work. Additionally, he was a recipient of prestigious fellowships like the Sahitya Akademi Fellowship and the Kerala Sahitya Akademi Fellowship, both of which celebrate excellence in literature. Not to forget, he also received the Kerala State Film Award for Best Story, showcasing his talent in storytelling for cinema. These awards collectively underscore his multifaceted talent and the significant impact he made across literature and film. They also connect to our broader theme of recognizing outstanding contributions in the arts and culture. Now let me walk you through this story that a homeopathic doctor shared with me. It revolves around two key elements, the snake and the mirror. The story is set in the doctor's youth, a time when he was unmarried. One hot summer night, he entered his room and started deep in thought. Suddenly, he had a startling encounter. A snake fell right onto him. Naturally, he was shocked and terrified. But here's the interesting part. The snake, instead of attacking, noticed its reflection in a nearby mirror and moved towards it. It seems that the snake was more fascinated by its own image than by the doctor himself. This encounter ended up saving his life. This story highlights how sometimes understanding ourselves or recognizing our own reflection can be crucial. It ties into the larger theme of perception and self-awareness that runs throughout this presentation. Has a snake ever coiled itself around any part of your body? A full-blooded cobra? All of us fell silent at that moment. The question was asked by the homeopath, and it immediately drew our attention because it was so unexpected. This question came up when we were discussing snakes, which is a topic that naturally surprises many of us, especially in a context where we might not expect such stories. We listened closely as the doctor continued sharing his tale. He set the scene with a hot summer night, approximately 10 o'clock. I had just finished my meal at a local restaurant and was heading back to my room. As I opened the door, I noticed a familiar noise coming from above. It was a sound that I recognized instantly, something that I often shared my space with. Yes, it was the rats. The noise was so constant that I could say that the rats and I shared that room. To prepare for the night, I took out my box of matches and lit the kerosene lamp on the table, since the house didn't have electricity. It was a small rented room, modest and simple. I had just begun my medical practice, and my earnings were barely enough to get by. I remember having only about 60 rupees in my suitcase, a modest amount. Inside, I kept some shirts, dhotis, and a single black coat, which I was wearing at the time. That night, I removed my black coat, white shirt, and the not-so-white vest, hanging them up carefully. I opened the 2 windows in the room to let in some fresh air, as it was an outer room with one wall facing the open yard. The roof was tiled, supported by long gables resting on the beams over the wall, but there was no ceiling. I could see the constant traffic of rats moving back and forth along the beams, a typical sight in such settings. I made my bed and pulled it close to the wall, trying to settle in for the night. But despite my efforts, sleep did not come easily. I got up and stepped out onto the veranda, hoping a little breeze might help me relax. However, even the wind seemed to have taken the night off, and I was left with the quiet, the heat, and the sounds of the night around me. Let's take a closer look at some keywords today. First, we have meager. This word describes something that is small in quantity, often not enough to meet expectations or needs. It highlights a sense of scarcity or insufficiency. Next, we move to gable. This term refers to the upper part of a wall that's located just below a sloping roof. You'll often see gables at the ends of houses, and they give a building its distinctive shape. Recognizing these elements helps us understand architectural features and how they contribute to the overall design. Connecting these concepts to our broader theme, understanding these terms enhances our vocabulary and allows us to describe both quantities and structures more precisely. Whether discussing the size of an amount or the features of a building, these words help us communicate clearly and effectively. I went back into the room and sat down on the chair. I opened the box beneath the table and took out a book, the Materia Medica. I opened it at the table where the lamp stood, alongside a large mirror. A small comb lay beside the mirror, tempting me to look into it. I took a quick glance. Back then, I was quite the admirer of beauty and believed in making myself look handsome. Since I was unmarried and a doctor, I felt I needed to make my presence felt. I picked up the comb, ran it through my hair, and adjusted the parting to make it look straight and neat. Then, I heard that familiar sound from above again. Which snake builds a nest? The answer is the female king cobra, the only snake that actually builds a nest. I took a closer look at my face in the mirror. That moment made me realize something important. I decided I would shave daily and grow a thin mustache to look more handsome. After all, I was a bachelor and a doctor. I looked into the mirror and smiled. It was an attractive smile. That made me think, why not keep that attractive smile on my face all the time? To look more handsome, of course. And again, that sound from above. Which snake gives birth to young ones? The answer is Russell's viper, an ovoviviparous species. That means it gives birth to live young by hatching eggs inside the mother's body. So these details about snakes, who builds a nest and who gives birth to live young, are fascinating. They remind us that snakes have diverse behaviors and reproductive strategies, which is an important part of understanding their nature and place in the ecosystem. Let's look at the word meanings, which introduces us to a couple of interesting expressions. First, we have earth-shaking, which means something very important or significant. It's used to describe events or news that have a huge impact. Next, I'll share a personal story that illustrates this idea. I got up and paced up and down the room, thinking about something very important, something that felt earth-shaking to me. Then, suddenly, another lovely thought struck me. I decided I would get married. Yes, I would marry a woman doctor who had plenty of money and a good medical practice. Now, there's an interesting detail. She had to be fat, and there's a valid reason for that. If I ever made a silly mistake and needed to run away, she shouldn't be able to catch me easily. So, I imagined she should be fat enough to make escape possible. With these thoughts in mind, I sat back down in my chair in front of the table. Everything was quiet, no more sounds from above. But then, suddenly, I heard a dull thud, like a rubber tube falling to the ground. I thought, surely that's nothing to worry about. However, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to turn around and take a look. No sooner had I turned than a fat snake wriggled over the back of the chair and landed right on my shoulder. The snake's landing and my turning happened at the same time, which made the moment even more startling. This story highlights how something seemingly small can feel earth-shaking in the moment, showing us the power of perception and surprise. Now let's take a closer look at the meanings behind some common movement words. First up is paced. When we say someone paced, it usually means they moved back and forth in a steady, deliberate way. It's often a sign of thinking or feeling anxious. Next is walked, which is the most straightforward, simply moving on foot at a normal pace. Then we have wriggled, which describes a more squirmy, twisting kind of movement, like when someone is uncomfortable or trying to get free. Moving on to crawled, which indicates moving on hands and knees. A slower, more careful type of movement, often used by bobbies or in certain situations where quick walking isn't possible. All of these words help us understand different ways people or animals move, and they add richness to how we describe actions. Remember, choosing the right word can really paint a clearer picture of what's happening and how someone is feeling. This ties into the overall theme of understanding subtle cues through language, helping us better interpret behaviors and emotions. Now let's focus on the word slithered. This describes the twisting and crawling motion of the snake. It's such a precise way to capture how snakes move, smooth, sinuous, almost hypnotic. When I think about this motion, I also feel a deeper connection to the scene, almost like the snake's movement symbolizes something larger. As I experienced this moment, I felt the immense presence of the creator of this world and universe. Yes, God was there. Imagine that, being in the midst of such a dangerous situation, yet sensing a divine presence. I tried to imagine saying something to God, maybe in my mind, but I feared that if I did, he might not like it. I visualized writing in bright letters outside my small heart the words, "Oh God," as if to reach out for help or acknowledgement. During this intense moment, I also felt a strange pain in my left arm. It was as if a heavy, leaden rod, no, not just a rod made of molten fire, was slowly but powerfully crushing my arm. It drained all my strength, and I wondered what could I do. Every slight movement I made seemed to trigger the snake to strike. Death was just 4 inches away, lurking. I wondered, if the snake struck, what medicine could I take? There were no medicines in the room. I was just a poor, foolish, and perhaps stupid doctor. Despite the danger, I forgot my fear momentarily and smiled feebly at myself, almost like a small act of defiance or hope. It seemed as if God appreciated that little smile. Then, the snake turned its head and looked into a mirror. It saw its own reflection. Now, I don't claim that this was the first snake to ever look into a mirror, but it's certain that this snake was looking into one at that moment. I began to wonder, was it admiring its own beauty? Or perhaps it was trying to decide whether to grow a mustache, use eyeshadow and mascara, or even wear a vermilion spot on its forehead. This simple act of the snake observing itself adds a layer of curiosity and reminds us how creatures, even snakes, can have moments of self-awareness or reflection. Now, moving on to the word hood, which refers to the head of the snake. This part of the snake is iconic, the hood that flares out when the snake feels threatened or is trying to appear larger. It's a crucial feature that often signals the snake's mood or intention. Together, these words, slithered and hood, help us understand not just the physicality of the snake, but also the symbolism behind its movements and features. They connect to the larger themes of perception, danger, divinity, and self-awareness that run throughout this story. Now, moving to slide 12, let's delve into some interesting details. First, the word lurked. It means to hide or remain hidden, often in a sneaky way. Then, feebly describes doing something weakly or without strength. These words help paint a vivid picture of the scene or the mood we're trying to convey. Next, a curious question. Which continent do snakes not inhabit? The answer is Antarctica. It's the only continent without snakes. Quite fascinating, isn't it? Now, how do snakes smell? Many people think they might have a nose like ours, but actually, snakes use their tongue to smell. They flick it out, gather scent particles, and then interpret those signals with a special organ called the Jacobson's organ. Let's also touch on the word attack. In the context of snakes, it often refers to a sudden, aggressive strike. And then there's the color vermilion, a bright red-orange hue, sometimes associated with boldness or warning signals in nature. Finally, I want to share a vivid story. I didn't know anything for certain about the snake, whether it was male or female. It unwound from my arm and slithered onto my lap, then moved towards the mirror, perhaps curious about itself. I was no longer just an image in granite. I was flesh and blood. Holding my breath, I quietly left the room, ran into the yard, and then I sprinted away as fast as I could. And as we all heave a sigh of relief, someone asks if my wife is very fat. No, she's quite thin, thanks to her gift for speed. When I ran, the snake followed me. Well, I kept running until I reached a friend's house, smeared oil over myself, took a bath, and changed clothes. The next morning, I went to retrieve my belongings, only to find most had been stolen, except for one final insult left behind by the thief. All these details connect back to our theme, about how encounters with nature and unexpected events can be startling, but also telling stories that stay with us. Let's look at the first part of this slide, which is about a thin, reedy person. Imagine someone who is tall and very slender, almost like a reed swaying in the wind. The description here paints a picture of a person who is quite slim and elongated. In the story, I asked, "What was that?" which shows curiosity or surprise. The doctor responded by talking about his vest, describing it as the dirty one, and mentioning that the fellow had such a sense of cleanliness. This might seem a bit humorous or ironic, someone who is very clean but perhaps took the vest and kept it dirty. The doctor also said that the rascal could have taken it and even used it after washing it with soap and water, which again hints at a mischievous or sneaky character. Then I asked if he saw the snake the next day. The doctor laughed and said he'd never seen it since. He added an interesting detail. It was a snake that was taken with its own beauty. This suggests that sometimes we might overlook or forget about things that are naturally beautiful or striking, just like the snake's own elegance. Now, moving to the second part of the slide, which is about being smeared or covered with something. This idea of smeared can relate to things being coated or obscured, which connects to the theme of perception and appearance. Sometimes, things are not as they seem because they are covered or hidden, and that's an important point to keep in mind as we continue exploring these ideas. Let's take a moment to understand the meaning behind these words. When we say taken with, we're referring to being captivated or deeply engaged by something. It's about feeling drawn in, almost as if you're emotionally or intellectually attracted to what you're experiencing. Similarly, attracted by emphasizes that sense of allure or appeal that draws us towards a person, idea, or object. Recognizing these subtle differences helps us better understand how we connect with others and our surroundings. This concept ties back to the overall theme of communication and relationships, how attraction influences interactions and perceptions. So, in essence, these words highlight the importance of understanding what naturally draws us in and how that impacts our connections.